Hi, it's Mark from Top Local Lead Generation. We're here with Bernie Pollock, Pollock Automotive in Vancouver. So far, 16-time winners of Best Auto Repair in Vancouver. If you want if you want anything serviced on your car, these are the guys to see. And we're going to talk about drum brakes today. How you doing, Bernie?
Doing well.
So, what parts are replaced during a drum brake job?
Excellent question. So drum brakes are quite a bit different than disc brakes, which we talked about in our last hangout. Drum brakes, they actually, instead of having a brake rotor and a brake pads, they use brake shoes and a brake drum. So I'll just get right down to looking at some pictures, because they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I apologize. This is a very tiny little picture, well, the best I could find, but it shows, if you see the brake drum, I know it's small to look at. You might need to get your reading glasses or magnifiers out. But the brake drum, that sits over the brake shoes, and the wheel is bolted up to the brake drum. So we'll just move on past this picture. There's an illustration basically of what is inside the brake drum. So these are stationary parts. They sit stationary. The drum rotates around the brake shoes. The brake shoes I've marked with the red arrows. And these are a frictional material like a brake pad. They're designed to wear out, but they wear out at a slow rate. So that's the main component that wears out. They press against the brake drum. So like a brake rotor, which wears out over time, the drums also take abuse and wear. And brake drums either need to be machined or replaced. Usually with drum brakes, we can machine them more frequently than with brake rotors. They tend to last longer. There's often less at stake with drum brakes because most cars use drum brakes on the rear. Unless it's a truck where there's a lot of weight on the back, drum brakes are really just provide us a very small amount of braking to a car, but it's important to keep the car stable and slow it down, but they don't take the abuse and wear that disc brakes do. So we can often machine the drums, and they often take very little wear, but just machining them so there's a nice, smooth, flat surface. So some of the other parts that I'm pointing out in this illustration, the green arrow points to a very important component. That's the wheel cylinder. Now this is kind of like the brake caliper on a disc brake. The wheel cylinder actuates the brakes. It's connected to the master cylinder. There's fluid flowing through it. When you push the brake pedal, there's pistons in the wheel cylinder that are forced out. They force the brake shoes against the brake drum, and that's what slows your car down. The yellow arrow points to the self-adjusting mechanism. These are different in many different types of brake systems, but all drum brake systems, with one exception, which I'll talk about later, have self-adjusting mechanism, because as the brake shoes wear, they have to travel further and further to the brake drum. And if they don't have a self-adjustment mechanism, your brake pedal goes lower and lower to the floor. Eventually, you may not have any brakes at all. So that's why the self-adjusting mechanism is there. The blue arrows point to the brake hardware. These are springs, hold-down pins, and items that generally get replaced when we replace the brake shoes. They stretch and move all the time and tend to wear. So those are the major components of the drum brake system. As I said, the shoes wear most frequently, along with the drums needing either resurfacing or replacement.
So, out of all these parts, which need replacement?
Well, the brake shoes. Most commonly, the items where the red arrows are pointing, the brake shoes, will almost always need replacement. The blue arrow items, the springs and hardware, need replacement. The self-adjusters usually last a long time. However, they do need servicing, and that's a key component of any brake job that we do. We always when we take everything apart, we clean it, we lubricate it, because these parts move just subtly, but it's important that they have the proper lubrication.
There's a black arrow there. You didn't mention anything about that. What's that point?
Yes, very good point. That's the parking brake lever. So many drum brakes, most drum brakes are found on the rear of cars these days. They haven't used drum brakes on the front of cars since probably the very early 70s. So the parking brake is actually a mechanical system, and it has cables that connect to the pedal or your lever that you pull in the car, and that black arrow points to the lever that actually pulls the brake shoes. So it just mechanically pulls the brake shoes against the drums.
So is there any extra servicing needed for the parking brake?
Yeah, so the parking brake, one thing we do with a brake inspection is actually inspect how the parking brake is working. When we take the drum off, we actually pull a parking brake lever or push it to make sure the cables aren't seized, because the cables will seize up occasionally and that'll cause the brake shoes to wear out. But other than that, it's mostly just requires the lubrication that we do with any brake service. Speaking of parking brakes, there are a lot of vehicles that have four-wheel disc brakes will use a drum brake exclusively for the parking brake. And this is a much simpler than the illustration you're looking at, in that it has the lever, it has the shoes, and it has an adjustment mechanism, but it does not have a wheel cylinder because it's not hydraulically actuated. So it's a much simpler version of this. Doesn't need service very often. You know, if you have a car that's 10 years old, you may never need to do a service on the parking brake. Really depends on, we look at these. If it needs to be serviced, we do it. Or if there's some problem with the brake, then we'll replace it.
So if